Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. No better place to spend a happy Valentine's Day than with a lovable group like the Battlefield Guides, right? My name is Fred Hawthorne, and I've been a guide for 34 years here at Gettysburg, and I was very interested when I came on board learning more about what guides were, other than what I heard about in papers and read in ads and things. And it just so happened I happened to be president of the Guides Association back in 1990 when our 75th anniversary came about. And part of my self-appointed duties at that time was to look at writing a history of the guides, because to my knowledge, there had never been one. Back in 1965, on our 50th anniversary, Colonel Jacob Sheeds was a guest speaker at the 50th anniversary banquet, and he wrote a very short 2.5-page speech, which for Colonel Sheeds was able to get probably at least 2 hours worth of material out of. And to the best of what I could tell, a lot of the information he drew from were his personal experiences with battlefield guides, since he had basically been working with them and as one since the 1930s. But I went back and I took a look. I said, what else have I been able to find out about guides? The only other thing that was there was back in the 1930s when the National Park Service took over Gettysburg as an entity. Of course, they inherited this mongrelized group of individuals called guides, and they had absolutely no idea what to do with them. So, as often happens in the government, they studied them, and a report came out. And it's from this report that most of what we know about guides today comes from. And I have a copy of that report. I've looked at it. To the best that I can tell, a lot of this came from oral tradition, not necessarily much in the way of written material. But I really became interested in the fact that as we take guiding back, and the title of this program originally was Peculiar Institution. That was the title of Colonel Sheeds' program in 1965. Century of Licensed Battlefield Guiding, and we do celebrate or commemorate our 50th or 100th anniversary this year. But something always stuck in the back of my craw about, what do you mean by 100th anniversary, 50th anniversary, 1915? What was so special about that year that made guiding come to be? And as I went back through the years, and I take you back through the years now, way back. To this period, October 1915, when our 100 years started. And it was October the 14th that the National Park, at that time, National Park Commission put an ad in the paper saying that as of the 17th of October, no one could be on government avenues without an official guide license. And that's where it started. And within a very few weeks, these gentlemen appeared. The first uniformed guide service. It took me a little while to figure out who these guys were and where they came from, and finally came across a Gettysburg Times newspaper article in 1965, the 50th anniversary. It had this picture in it and had all these people labeled as to who they were. And that created some interest, because as part of their application process in 1915 to get their license, they were asked the question, how many years have you been a guide? Not, do you want to become a guide? How many years have you been guiding? And as I looked at that, there were only 2 of those fellas up there who had never guided before this license came into effect. 5 of these guys have guided for more than 10 years already. 2 of them began guiding back in the era of monumentation and are nearing 30 years service on the field. So that begged the question, how did guiding actually begin? And what I wanted to do in this talk is do something I've not done before, and that's basically look at pre-guiding, prehistory, bring you up to October 17th, 1915. How did we get there? And in a past life, when I taught in the public schools, one of my jobs was teaching economics. We had something called the iron law of supply and demand that supposedly explained a lot of stuff. And supply and demand certainly can explain why a lot of things happen here at Gettysburg. There would not have been a guide service at Gettysburg unless there was a demand for guide services. So I wanted to take a look at how did that demand get started. And no demand is met unless you have a supply of something capable of meeting it. There had to be individuals in and around this area that were capable of giving a battlefield tour. So I took a look at it from that perspective. And I started there. Now, to a lot of individuals, this is on the internet a lot. Everybody likes to argue about this picture, where it was taken, what angle it was taken from, where's it at. I've never been concerned with that. I'm happy with the fact that it was probably Gettysburg in July of 1863. What I want to know is that the first battlefield guide. Because what's he doing out there on that dismal field, July 5th or 6th of 1863? Well, originally in the aftermath of the battle, what you have is you do have a lot of local individuals called upon to deal with an influx of people coming into town, initially looking for loved ones. This battle had been very traumatic in the North. The North was very much aware of it. If you had not heard from a loved one, you're capable of getting to a spot like this. You're going to try to come and deal with the situation, see if you can figure out, help them out in some way. Aside from this individual, you're going to eventually start getting a whole group of people, which I would call curiosity seekers. People who don't have any vested interest in the battle. They didn't have a loved one in it, but they're just simply curious to see a battlefield that they've read about. They're going to start showing up here. None of these people, when they get off the station, have any inkling about Gettysburg, where a battle took place, where the action is. Local people are going to. Aside from that, there's going to be a brief spurt of visitation in November of 1863 when President Lincoln comes. Some accounts have upwards of 15,000 people coming here. In a town of 2,400, that left an awful lot of people that needed direction as to where they're going, and certainly locals are going to be called upon for that. But when that dies down, the war continues, the war ends, and people, as people generally are, when wars get over with, they're tired of talking about war. They're tired of listening, and I'm sure things died off here in Gettysburg. Now, I've been able to find exactly 2 mentions of early guides in this period of time. One of them was a fellow named Isaac Moorhead in October of 1864 from the western part of the state. And he came to Gettysburg and he wrote an account called A Visit to Gettysburg, a tourist account. He talked about his excellent guide, a Mr. Fry. I've not been able to identify who he is beyond Mr. Fry, except the fact that there's at least 6 people in Gettysburg in the 1860 census who would have been in Gettysburg in 1864 and spry enough that they could have been crawling all over rocks and places like that. So Mr. Fry apparently is one of our first battlefield guides, and the only thing we know about him is he told Mr. Moorhead he had assisted with the burials of the dead in the aftermath of the battle. There is another account by Schuyler Colfax, who was the Speaker of the House of Representatives for a while, but later served as Vice President of the United States. He came here in 1867, and he had a guide who he never named. I could almost choke him to death for not saying the name of the person, but he never named him. But he called him an excellent resource. He said he listened eagerly to the clear, vivid recital of the exciting scenes of those great days, the marching, the counter-marching of the regiments, the armies, the charges, the shocks of the contending legions, the repulse, and the final victory. And there's nothing beyond that in the record for some time. Not a very good picture, but the only one I could find of this individual. I tried to get another one for the Historical Society, but other than the name, they didn't have anything for him. This is John Riddle Warner and his brother. John is on the right, and he was the minister of the Lower Marsh Creek Presbyterian Church during the Civil War. He had been installed there in the spring of 1858, married. This lovely woman right here, Jane Craig, who was known by the nickname Jenny Craig, before the diet substance came around. So Jenny Craig and her husband, John, were here at the Battle of Gettysburg. They had a baby, Mary. She was born in 1862, so she was just barely a year old when the battle was fought. And during the battle, like all other residents, they hid in their cellars. Jenny and the baby down in the basement, but Reverend Warner said he watched the battle through the trap door of his roof. In the aftermath, he tended to the physical and the spiritual needs of the wounded of both sides. By the fall of 1863, typhoid fever was spreading, and Jenny contracted it, and she died on September 30th, her husband's 36th birthday. She is one of the casualties of the Battle of Gettysburg, certainly. John immediately sent his baby daughter off to live with relatives, and he sort of covered up his grief by sitting down and writing out his thoughts of the battle. And by early 1864, he was delivering a 2-hour lecture entitled The 3 Days Battle at Gettysburg. And ads start showing up in the newspapers. This one here, I thought this was very interesting. Notice the top ad. We are requested to state there will be no services at Reverend Mr. Warner's church on Sunday. Okay, poor guy's sick, he won't be there. Then you look down below and you find out he's out around the country somewhere else. But he begins delivering this lecture around the country, various places. It said that the first one that he gave was at a church setting in Philadelphia. And even though the setting of the church kind of inhibited applause at first, gradually, once it started, they said the applause for the speech was thunderous till the end. And over the next 6 months, I found dozens and dozens of these ads in the paper where he was speaking. February of 1864, he spoke to a group of about 2,500 soldiers in Philadelphia. March of 1864, he was invited to speak before the Pennsylvania legislature. And in May of 1864, the 18th of May actually, he was invited to speak at the House of Representatives in Washington on the topic, the Battle of Gettysburg. And one of the honored guests in the Washington audience that day was Abraham Lincoln. And I have checked President Lincoln's personal schedule, and on that day, it says he visited the House of Representatives to listen to Reverend Warner's lecture. Finally, in the fall of 1865, after the war, Gettysburg itself gets to hear Reverend Warner. This ad appeared in paper. This lecture has been received with the highest approval everywhere, and now when he is about to deliver it in our midst, it must bring together a very large audience. The high reputation of the lecturer and his deeply interesting subject gives an special reason why all in our community should hear him. As the war ended, his lecture opportunities became less and less. In 1867, he was actually delivering this lecture out in St. Louis, Missouri. Ended up in a place called Kirkwood, and they grabbed a hold of him basically and had him come out there to take charge of their church. And he will live out in Kirkwood, Missouri, probably never speaking about Gettysburg again until his death in 1894. But what's important about Reverend Warner is the fact that he is what I would call today a propagandist. He's taking the word of Gettysburg, he's taking what happened here, and he's taking it outside the boundaries of this little town to cities around the country, and he's telling people about it, telling people what happened. So he truly is the one who's selling this town. This fellow right here is the one everybody hears about. And in the 1938 Park Service memo, they attribute guides springing out of John Batchelder. John Batchelder. Basically saying that local people who helped Batchelder in his monument locations, who helped Batchelder in his various projects, became somewhat knowledgeable of what was going on and started taking people around the field. End of story, period. But it seems a little bit more complicated than that, and I had to take a look a lot at Batchelder. And I had a lot of misconceptions about him that were given out over the years, and this particular preparation I've done has changed some of those. Batchelder, of course, is not a historian. Anybody know what he is professionally? He's an artist. He's an artist, he's an engraver, he is an entrepreneur, for lack of a better word. And when the Civil War broke out in 1861, he basically had a plan of working on a comprehensive, historically accurate painting of the Battle of Bunker Hill. And he was very frustrated because he couldn't find any information on the battle. Well, we know today the battle was on Breed's Hill. Maybe that was one of the problems. But he couldn't find people to actually talk to give him a good visual picture of what this battle looked like. And then the Civil War breaks out. So he decides, well, forget that war. I'm going to deal with this one. Sometime in this war, there's going to be a great action take place. There's going to be a battle. And I'm going to be there. And I'm going to record it. And I'm going to create the great painting of that particular war. Now, he attached himself with the Army of the Potomac, 1862. We know he was on the peninsula. We know that he stayed in the camps. We know that he met a lot of Union officers at the time. He was there for the Battle of Fair Oaks. He was there for some of the 7 days battles. None of those had the grandeur that he anticipated. And he finally went home to Boston area. But leaving word with his friends in the Army, if something's happening, let me know. And sure enough, the Gettysburg campaign emerges. John Batchelder starts moving towards the Army. He will arrive here somewhere between July 5th and July 8th, just after the battle. And he spent 2 days on horseback just riding around the battlefield. Maybe that was John Batchelder on that horse in that picture. I don't know. We know he was riding around the battlefield. We know he spent 2 days. We know he saw unburied and buried dead on the field. He saw the points of the action. And at some point during that ride, he decided he was going to do what was called an isometrical map. An isometrical map, for those that aren't aware, is a map that you're not looking down on, you're looking at it from an angle. And he had this vision of this being somewhat of a good commercial opportunity for him. So it says he started a mile east of Round Top, sketching the terrain looking west. At every significant object in the terrain he would sketch. And the next day he would go down a little bit further west, and he'd do it again. He spent 84 days doing that. 84 days drawing, 84 days talking to the wounded around the field, talking to veterans around the field. The drawing he envisioned would also have on it troop positions. And this is a much higher quality version of it, where the troop positions for all 3 days would be on the same map. All of this was done between July 5th of 1863 and about September the 26th. That's when we know that Batchelder left town, 84 days that he was here. He left the field specifically to produce this particular map. He sent copies to George Meade, the Army commander. He sent copy to all surviving Corps commanders, many other officers that he knew. He sent copies here to the town of Gettysburg for their verification. And specifically what he was looking for was their approval. Is this presenting an accurate view of the battlefield of Gettysburg that you have just left? Does this present an accurate view of troop positions? And you had these people all sign and attest to it. And if you have a copy of the Batchelder map, you see a facsimile of these signatures at the bottom. Not content with this, he asked George Meade for permission to go to the Army's encampments, fall of 1863, winter of 1864. And during those bleak days of winter, he basically said he saw an officer from every unit that participated in the Battle of Gettysburg. Showed him his map, asked him to make corrections, took a look at it, give him some suggestions on things that need to be done, learning about it. And he later was very proud of the fact, he said he filled several notebooks that winter of information, but he said it may be interesting to those who possess this drawing to know just one solitary regiment has been discovered to be out of position. The rascal never said which one it was. Leaves us to wonder, I guess, forever. Well, he's in Washington when the war ends. April the 14th, 1865, when Abraham Lincoln is assassinated, John Batchelder is in Washington, D.C. And now he has a new idea, a new venture. He decided the best thing this country could use to commemorate this event is we need a painting. We need a painting of the deathbed of Abraham Lincoln. And in that painting, we should put every person who visited Abraham Lincoln in his deathbed during that night that he lay dying. According to John Batchelder, there were 46 of them. Now, if you've ever been in the room in that house where he died, that room is 10 foot by 17 foot. There's no way that many people could squeeze in that little room, but that didn't bother Batchelder. He actually made contact with everyone who had visited, asked them would they come and have a photograph taken at his expense in the clothing that they wore when they visited Lincoln. These photographs are out in Chicago today. Robert Todd Lincoln agreed and had a photograph taken. Vice President Andrew Johnson, Secretary of War Edwin Stanton. And Batchelder hired an artist named Alonzo Chappell to complete the design, which he did in 1868. And this is the finished copy. Batchelder sketch version, finished copy of all the people in that room. This version is 4 by 8 feet. And today it is in the Chicago Historical Society is where it's at today. Gave Batchelder an idea. Okay, now he will start selling this painting, or prints of this painting around the country. As I said, Batchelder's an entrepreneur. He's trying to make money. You make money by selling things. You sell an isometrical map. You sell the last hours of Lincoln. Why can't we sell Gettysburg? Anybody ever seen this before? I call this a pre-cyclorama. Pre-cyclorama. This is a painting, I'll go back to it for a second, that he envisioned sometime in 1864. I think the Lincoln thing threw him off track on it. But essentially he contracted with another famous artist named James Walker. Walker had already been represented. He had painted a painting called The Battle of Chapultepec, which today hangs in the House of Representatives or in Congress somewhere. There's another famous Walker painting down at Point Park in Chickamauga, Chattanooga National Park on the Battle of Lookout Mountain that was commissioned by Joseph Hooker. John Batchelder commissioned Walker to do a painting called The Repulse of Longstreet's Assault. He started in 1864 when the commission went out. Walker and Batchelder would both work on it off and on for the next 6 years. It'll be finished in 1870, the Walker painting. And this second part here is just a little bit more of a blow-up of it. When this came out in 1870, critics held the work. It was in size 7.5 foot by 20 foot. It's a big painting, 7.5 foot by 20 foot. John Batchelder drew this key. Everybody in that painting up there was somebody. It wasn't just a painting of a face. It was somebody who had fought in the battle. He had talked to officers. He'd been here in 1865. I'll talk about that later. 1866, 1869. 3 times while this painting was in production, Batchelder came to Gettysburg with officers in the field. We know that he took officers who were in New York City when Walker was working on the painting to the studio to make comments. So they're actually doing this all at the same time. Batchelder claimed no less than 13 generals of the Union Army at Gettysburg were involved with this painting when it was finished. So what we've got now is a painting finished and ready to travel around the country. And John Batchelder will travel with it frequently for the next number of years. They'll set it up. You'll pay a ticket. He will stand there and he will tell you what you're looking at. He will explain the repulse of Longstreet's attack based on this. And we have a number of these flyers that were put out. His standard fee for it, I believe, was $100. $100 you get John Batchelder and you get the painting. And he'll talk to you about it. The statement that was made here in one of the papers, this is the Boston Traveler, said the beautiful painting of the repulse of Longstreet at the Battle of Gettysburg is one that every person should see, and no more favorable opportunity will ever be offered than the present. Colonel John Batchelder has just issued a beautiful descriptive key. That's that jumble right there, the beautiful descriptive key of the battle, and he will be on hand to explain it for you. A year later, John Batchelder is still going strong. This is in 1871. He's promoting it. In addition, I noticed an interesting thing about this. I have a much better copy of this. He has now developed a repertoire of about a half a dozen talks that he's given. The Pennsylvania Campaign, general review of the battle, detailed description of the battle, grand review of the battle. I have no idea what the difference is between those 3 talks. The artillery of Gettysburg, Massachusetts troops, and the one I personally would have loved to have heard, thrilling incidents with the death, wounding, or capture of 55 general officers. So this is information he has acquired from his study of the battle in 1863 and 64 and his preparation of the painting itself. One of the statements, he says, "Let no one say in after years, we once had the wonderful painting of the Battle of Gettysburg in our city, and Colonel Batchelder was here to explain it, and though I can hardly tell why, I neglected to see it or hear the lecture." Big guilt trip laid on you for all of that. So we have Reverend Warner and John Bowchelder. What they have in common is both of these men are traveling around the country spreading Gettysburg. Long before there's any interest coming here, they're letting people know about it. This is not just soldiers, not just returned veterans. These are general audiences who are paying a quarter, usually, to come in for an admission to get a seat. Now, Gettysburg itself is not beyond creating its own demand, but they're working along a little bit different route. The health fad, the curative power of delicious and healthy spring water. In 1867, while Batchelder's still working on the Walker map, the Battle House and Mineral Springs Watering Place Company at Gettysburg has been founded. So you get delicious spring water. Anybody remember where this was? We don't have anybody that old, I hope, in here right now, because this was gone by the turn of the century. And the hotel, I think, burned down in 1917. But it's out near out on the old golf course, essentially, is where it is, across Willoughby Run. To handle all the new people coming in June of 1869, the Gettysburg Springs Hotel opened for business. This one right here, 4 stories, 300 occupants could fit in it. So as the Walker painting neared completion, John Bowchelder was involved with this in a way, and he was finishing touches on a book of his that he had written called Batchelder's Illustrated Tourist Guide to Popular Resorts and How to Reach Them. One of the popular resorts is, guess what? Gettysburg. Gettysburg Springs Hotel. And he will basically spin off a little bit of his in a separate publication called Gettysburg, What to See and How to See It. Published in 1873, I think it likely is the first guidebook in the area. If you read it, it's a little bit more travelogue and not much history. More travelogue, this is what you're going to see, not much history. He always refers to, and I forgot to count how many times he did, but he said, for the history, you want to refer to my forthcoming history of the battle. Okay? Always selling something else down the road. My forthcoming history, he's going to promise. But a focus was to promote the springs in particular, and Gettysburg in general, as a resort worthy of visit. Now, right, we have this fellow appear in a line. During Batchelder's many visits that he comes in the 1860s and 70s to Gettysburg, he would have had to have come across this gentleman right here, William David Holdsworth. Gettysburg citizen, Union veteran. He was born in 1843, actually training to be a stone cutter when the American Civil War broke out. And he was one of the very first enlistees from Adams County, enlisted in the 2nd Pennsylvania Infantry. That's a 3-month regiment. September of 61, when the 2nd Pennsylvania was mustered out, he immediately signed up Company F, 87th Pennsylvania, for 3 years service. And in June of 1863, 15th of June, he is slightly wounded and captured at the Battle of Carter's Woods. We would know that as 2nd Winchester, Gettysburg Campaign. So when Gettysburg is fought in his town, Holdsworth is on his way to Belle Isle in Richmond, Virginia, where he will spend 6 weeks guest of the Confederacy. He is exchanged in early August and is serving honorably to the end of his 3-year commitment, where he will then veteranize. He will basically re-enlist as a veteran volunteer service for the rest of the war, and for that he is rewarded with a bad shoulder wound at the Battle of Weldon Railroad. But he stays on duty through the regiment at Appomattox, returns home. He becomes a charter member of the Skelly Post. I do have a picture of him right here about that time. He is a charter member of Jack Skelly Post 9 GAR. And he is elected the Registrar and Recorder of Adams County in 1866 and will serve until 1869, a 3-year term. And according to his biography in the county history, it is in 1869 when he begins guiding folks around the battlefield. So that's the date that he apparently gives that he becomes a battlefield guide. He's the only one that we have that early that continues guiding the rest of his life. I don't know about Mr. Fry. I don't know about Schuyler Colfax's unknown guide. The unknown guide might have been William Holdsworth. I just don't know. Probably no way of finding that out. Excuse me.
Is he wearing a badge in that last picture?
I'm sure that is a GAR badge.
Okay, got
I'm sure that's a GR badge right there. Yeah. Okay. Let's go back one. 1869, he also becomes partner in a livery stable in town. Becomes partner with a guy named Perry Tate. And I don't think Mr. Tate was very happy in the livery business, so he basically sold out to one of Holdsworth's army buddies, a guy named William Ziegler. And in 1870, the Ziegler and Holdsworth livery stable is formally founded. Now, the one necessary thing you need as a visitor coming to Gettysburg, you need to have a way to get around town. You need to go to a livery stable. You need to either hire a rig or hire somebody to take you around. That's why livery stables are so popular and so important at that particular time, and Holdsworth owns one of the biggest ones. We know that by 1879, I found two quotes in here, actually both dealing with Holdsworth. Mr. Holdsworth has driven most of the generals who took part in the battle over the field while visiting the same. He is perhaps as well posted concerning the great battle as any man now living. Well, the only way he would have driven generals around the field is he was the one supplying the liveries for Batchelder during Batchelder's reunions. I think that's where they're coming to. So both of these men are coming up. Interesting story. You not only have Holdsworth doing livery riding, of course, you've got to have 20 buggies, you need 20 drivers. And they hire young men for it. And the story that I have here is about 1878 and simply says, our driver and guide was a youth of 16, and he was one of the heroes of the battle. Okay? He captured a rebel gun. On my asking if he remembered the battle, he said, oh yes, I remember it well. I was just 4 years old. And then he told me how a soldier was shot dead in the street opposite his mother's house, and he ran out to pick up the gun. His mother, in her alarm, called to him to come back. But some Union soldiers cheered him on, helped him to carry the gun in the house, and he has it yet. And his name is Charlie Tate. So I'm sure it's one of the Tate's younger sons, early guide, Battle of Gettysburg. 4-year-old veteran of the battle. Okay. Now you also have to have something for these people to see when they're coming. Of course, we have to bring in the Gettysburg Battlefield Memorial Association. They received their state charter in the spring of 1864 and begin to purchase acreage. And the fellow, of course, responsible for starting that is a guy named David McConaughey. Not unusual, David McConaughey's father-in-law was a guy named George Arnold. And in 1878, George Arnold got permission to set up the first tourist attraction in town, a tower on Cemetery Hill. Why did I put it over the top of that? Because that's where the tower was. The tower was torn down when the statue of Hancock was put up. Interesting how the father-in-law gets the contract on the son-in-law's idea. So all that's out there. But something to bring people in. It's that same year, 1878, where we have two things happen. These are the two critical things, I think, that really cause guiding in this area to explode. One is this. 1878, the Pennsylvania Division of the Grand Army of the Republic, the GAR, chose Gettysburg as the site of their annual state encampment. And they are given permission to camp on association grounds around George Arnold's new tower. Okay? A lot of coincidence there. They will hold this annually from 1880 until 1894. So 14 years, with the exception of 2 years they went somewhere else, they will hold their annual summer conference here. This is just the GAR. And what this does, we know historically, is that the increased visibility, veterans seeing what's going on, veterans seeing the potential, it encourages veterans to start purchasing stock in the GBMA and essentially taking it over, making it a little bit more vibrant organization. And it marks the beginning of what I call the era of monumentation. Some of the first markers in the field are going to go up this time. Second event that's going to take place is this. I want you to look close at this picture, right there. Everybody see that? That's William Holdsworth. That is William Holdsworth. This is in the spring of 1884, and it's the Golden Spike ceremony of the Gettysburg and Harrisburg Railroad coming into town from the north. William Holdsworth was there. He's a guide, he's a liveryman, and he's licking his chops. See it? 1884, March? This is March 4th that this is taking place, March 4th, 1884. Pardon?
Which gentleman? Which one? Highlighted again.
Okay. He's right there. See that hat? Beard? That's him. William Holdsworth. I suspect one reason he is these people all didn't walk there, and they all didn't come on that train from Harrisburg. The Gettysburg delegation came out by livery. They probably chartered a lot of coaches and carriages, and Holdsworth is right here in the middle. But now that you have an attraction growing up here, you've got people who know about Gettysburg, and now you have the Gettysburg and Harrisburg Railroad, which gives them an excellent route of access from the north, the way the population of the country is. Boston, New York, Philadelphia, they're coming in that way. The old branch line that was built here in 1858 coming up from the south just simply wasn't going to meet the demand that these new trains would come. With the completion of the railroad comes this. Where's it at? Still stands today, Washington Street and Railroad Street. This was their local terminal that had been built. And one of the individuals I'm going to talk about here is this fellow right here, Jacob Alfred Holdsworth, Sergeant Holdsworth's youngest son. Holdsworth will become a guide here in the 1890s. He will be licensed in 1915. He'll be serving up till the 1950s. So he's one of our older guides. And just before his death in the 1950s, the Gettysburg Times interviewed him, because here's a last living tie to the era when the railroad came to town and the excursions of that time. And a lot of the information I was able to get was from young Holdsworth here. He basically said that any time one of these trains come in, hotels, livery stables, and others would send men with their buggies to meet the trains and shout the virtues of various establishments in order to secure the incoming tourist. Now you see right over there, that buggy's backed up. And I'm sure these guys are all the ones shouting the virtues. All the buggies and wagons would back up to the station, and when the passengers got out, everybody started shouting the praises of the tour or his hotel with whatever hope of attracting the largest number of customers. The railroad itself gets in. This is one of the older tour books of the battle, pure tour books, 1885, published by the Gettysburg and Harrisburg Railroad. And it was designed to promote their new excursions to the field. Nothing to do on the weekend, $1.50, $2, $3 to get your round trip ticket to Gettysburg and a good meal in town. Jump on the train in the morning, have you home by evening. Excursions. And we'll give you this little booklet to let you know what you want to be in it. Not one block away from the train station was Ziegler and Holdsworth's livery stables. This is today's Susquehanna Bank on Washington Street. Railroad station's back over here. And this fellow's William Ziegler. I have not found any evidence of William Ziegler doing any type of guiding ever. There are Zieglers who were guides, but William Ziegler and his sons apparently never did. Ziegler's background was in carriage making. My suspicion is the partnership is he made and maintained the carriages, Holdsworth ran them. He's an interesting character in himself. He's also a veteran of the 87th Pennsylvania, the same battle near Weldon Railroad that got Holdsworth his left shoulder shot, captured William Ziegler. He was sent to Andersonville. According to his own statement later, he was the last living prisoner to walk out of Andersonville prison. So he had a fairly traumatic event in his own life. The railroad brings monumentation, makes it easier for them to have it. And this is a photograph that was taken in 1884, 1 year later, of the 93rd Pennsylvania Infantry Marker, one of many dedications held that year and the subsequent years. Allie Holdsworth in 1958 said, "As a child, I went along with my father, and we got a lot of information from survivors of the battle concerning the whereabouts of the troops and their activities." This group back here has William Holdsworth in it. Anybody see him? There he stands. And those fellows around him are Teamsters. Every one of them, probably his employees. And every one of them is a guide. And for you guides who are in here, I could told right away that that group were guides. There's not a uniform that matches, and they're wearing 20 different kind of hats. Those are the guides. So that is a monument dedication. How do these veterans get out to their monument sites? You need carriages to take them in. There's the carriage drivers. There's the guides. They're picking up stories. They're talking to these old fellas as they're going around. And of course, monuments mean you're going to have to also have people to build them. I don't know which one he is, but one of our early guides, Charles Culp Jr., first job he had on the battlefield was helping to erect the first Massachusetts monument. That's this monument. I don't know which one of these is he, but one of them is. He will continue guiding here at Gettysburg until World War II, when he passes away. 27th Connecticut in the wheat field. It's dedication day. I put this up here for a reason, but look at everything back in the back. Okay? These guys don't walk out there. They're taking carriages out. Those carriage drivers are with it. Holdsworth said in the early days of guiding, you basically had to know where every regiment was and just about where every company was. If you didn't, the old soldiers coming back would tell you. Okay? Those guys down below there. Tourists traveled in all types of horse-drawn conveyances, depending on the size of the party. Holdsworth livery had on hand everything from a surrey to a 21-passenger, 4-horse wagon. In fact, we had 3 of those for the larger parties. Okay? Larger parties meant greater profit. We know from the records that a single couple, just in town, not with an excursion ticket, not coming down the train, you could rent a horse, a carriage, and a guide for the whole day for $3. That's going rate. 1951, the guide rates for a 2-hour tour were $3. They never changed from that time to 1951. The hours got less, but the pricing was the same. The reason they like larger parties is when you had a larger party, you didn't pay by the day, you paid by the person. $1 a person. So there's $21 right there. Okay? Larger parties, much more money involved. Now I know that the Gettysburg and Harrisburg Railroad, they hooked up with Holdsworth pretty early. He's guiding. He's become, I think, the guiding on the battlefield what John Batchelor has become to the information, the knowledge of the field. And because of this, the guides that the railroad put out, one of the ads they had in it was they took you to Major Holdsworth, the best posted man. Notice how he's been promoted. He's gone from sergeant to major. You know more when you have greater rank. But I don't know that he ever called himself that. He was always sergeant. So Holdsworth and other of these early guides all affiliated with a hotel in town. Now, this was the Eagle Hotel, which is where the 7-Eleven is on Washington Street today. This is the Eagle Hotel. Over here would be the livery stable, Ziegler and Holdsworth. Back here would be the station. Everything's nice and convenient for the visitor. And they hooked up with him fairly early. This hotel will become Guide Central up until basically the destruction of it. I think it was burned in 1960. There's still guides working out of the Eagle at that time, under different people. July of 1884, the battlefield's made more accessible by this, the completion of the Round Top branch of the Gettysburg and Harrisburg Railroad. It's about 3 miles long. Trains run every hour. Fare, 25 cents. Get you out the field, get you back in. And like anything else, they are publicists. They published their own little booklet, an excursion guide just for Oak Hill to the Round Tops. That's the railroad going south. This is one of the rare booklets that's out there today. I have my suspicions that William Holdsworth may have written this for them. The reason being this story. This is a William Holdsworth guide story. It's a good one. I'm not sure how true it is. Okay. Man with 2 legs and no arms carrying a man with 2 arms and no legs to get water. Well, I'd always heard that story even when we were little. It showed up in that guide. That's where it is for the first time. Okay? So either Holdsworth or the railroad did it. So by the 25th anniversary of the battle, 1888, guiding is a well-established operation. is controlled by the livery stables, is controlled by the railroads, is controlled by the hotels. And they're all tied together. Holtzworth is tied to the Gettysburg-Harrisburg Railroad. He's tied to the Ewell Hotel. It's all tied together. If you can't get Holtzworth, you're going to get one of his 20 or 25 other people. And there's other liveries in town doing it. And by that time, we already have a problem because notice the Eagle Hotel is saying it's the place to secure reliable guides. Okay? If you have reliable ones, you have to have unreliable ones too. And clearly by 1888, we're getting that. Well, John Batchelder is still very heavily involved with the battlefield. We can't leave him out of it. He's completely involved in it still. Following the promotion of that isometrical drawing that I mentioned and the Walker painting, he has decided to continue his goal of writing this true history of the battle. And he does have these officers' reunions here. 1869 was one of the first big ones. He had claimed 120 Northern officers and 3 Southerners. Harry Heath, the division commander, was here for that 1869 reunion. His adjutant, a guy named Finney, and the third man was a fellow named Walter Harrison. It was that year, August 1869, where Walter Harrison sat underneath the copse of trees and told Batchelder these are important, which is why we have the copse trees the way they are today. Well, that's when he was here. Batchelder that summer drove 224 stakes around the battlefield. He's taking these guys around. He's saying, I want you to tell me where this general went down or where this officer went down. And he drove stakes in the ground and marked them. He again is continuing the tradition of gathering information. And Holtzworth's livery stables are going to be heavily involved in that. 1874, Batchelder signs a contract with the federal government to produce this. Now, in the 1866-67 period, of course, the engineers had come here and drawn what we call today the Warren maps. Not content with the Warren maps the way they were, the government wanted Batchelder to take all this information you've gathered and place the information on what they called the engineers' maps. So over a period of about 2 years, 1874 to 76, Batchelder sat down with those 3, or more than 3, that big map, broke it down into 3 individual daily maps showing the troop positions on each day. This is what it looks like, and I'm sure some of you probably have copies of it in your libraries and things. He is getting so well known himself, Batchelder, that he will take this fellow around, President Rutherford B. Hayes, May of 1878. And this strictly came out of the fact that he was the author of the position map with the troops on it. So he also is doing some guiding here. John Batchelder has made a study of this battlefield, knows more about it than any other living man. That's almost the same quote word for word they said about Holtzworth. So we got 2 guys who apparently know a lot about the battle. Is going to be here to take the president around. Shortly after that, this fellow. Anybody recognize him? Nope. Wrong armies. This is Wade Hampton. Wade Hampton. He is a United States Senator in May of 1880. And what the people in the Washington War Department decided at that time was, okay, we got this great map. We've got this great map. We got all this stuff on it. What's the proof that those regiments are in the right spot? What's the proof? And he wrote a bill appropriating $50,000 to Colonel Batchelder. This will be signed by the president in 1880, not to write the history of the battle. This is something that I found amazing because in the last 20 years we've had people write the book of Batchelder that he was supposed to write, saying, here's the one that he came out. He was never paid to write a book. That wasn't his job. He was to, quote, compile all available data used in locating the troop positions on the engineers' maps, provide diagrams showing troop movements in greater detail, all materials to become the property of the government. All he was to do was to take what he knew, write it down, document it, and turn it to the government. He was never to write a history of it. It's a good thing he didn't because, first of all, it earns him the title government historian, but his book, when it does come out, is like 2,550 pages. Well, it's because it's a document of the map, not a history of the battle. But it earns him the title government historian of Gettysburg and gets him the notice of the GBMA, who immediately make him the director on the Battlefield Memorial Association. And this sort of takes him out of his art mode forever because he'll spend the rest of his life working with GBMA, putting monuments down, making sure inscriptions on tablets are right. This is a picture of the GBMA in 1884, the Board of Directors. And I blew up 2 of them because William Holdsworth is also on the Gettysburg Battlefield Memorial Association Board of Directors. He serves on the Committee on Inscriptions. He serves on the Committee on Location. And who do you think the chair of those are? John Batchelder. Okay. These guys know each other well. These guys are colleagues here in the battlefield. I don't know how the relationship started. I suspect it was John Batchelder jumped in Holdsworth's carriage one day. But it started a working relationship that lasted until both men died. He is still going around the country delivering talks, Batchelder is. I've seen him as late as 1883, Everett Hall in Boston, talking about giving his lectures on the Battle of Gettysburg. And he appears occasionally in Gettysburg conducting tours, one of the last of which, for this fellow, is this one. Winfield Scott Hancock's 3rd and last visit to the Battle of Gettysburg. He visited here in 1865. He was here in 1866. He doesn't come here until just a few months before his death in 1885. Another thing that came up out of this talk, this is supposedly what I was told 30 years ago, where Batchelder was given kind of a knock by saying, well, he doesn't really know what he's doing because Hancock came back in 1885 and said, I don't recognize the spot you're putting this marker. Anybody hear that before? I went back and looked at the whole quote. The quote is this. He said, I was here in 1866. Stannard and Benedict, both generals of the Vermont Brigade. Stannard and Benedict know the position I was wounded, and it was marked out by us on my visit in 1866. I do not recognize the spot now pointed out as that where I was shot. That's where the people who say he didn't know it stopped, but they didn't read the rest of the sentence. But I was satisfied of the general accuracy of the place when I indicated in 1866. All he's saying is, guys, this was 20 years ago. I don't recognize it now. But you asked me 3 years after the battle when I said it was. So, okay, it still is. Well, Batchelder's trying to do that. He's trying to get all this stuff down. This is Holdsworth, again, 1886. He's with Wade Hampton. This isn't the big cavalry union on the battlefield. This was led by Batchelder. Batchelder wanted to get the cavalry out there. He gets Gregg, he gets Hampton. But Holdsworth is there, because here's his picture right beside the buggy. Both men still out here giving it. In his usual and graphic and interesting manner, Batchelder described the battle and pointed out to his listeners where all of these events took place. Probably Holdsworth, that's an incident, just Hampton again. Most unusual tour for John Batchelder, for William Holdsworth, is this one. These are Cheyenne and Arapaho leaders who came here in November 1884. They were on their way to Washington. Okay? Now, I don't know if you guys know this look. We call it, it's only a 2-hour tour look. Okay? William Holdsworth sitting in the group. Now, there was a story that came along with this. It's kind of interesting. It was printed in a New Jersey newspaper about this talk, but basically not so much about how these chiefs felt about this battle, and there's not much impression for them. They were more interested in the meal at the Eagle Hotel afterwards. There's more information on that than later. But they said after this, kind of into this, the article said, the battlefield's instructive, and the tales heard there are fragments of a history that will take a generation to write. Perhaps the most remarkable man in town is Major W.D. Holdsworth, the guide and hackman. Twice a day in fair weather does he tell the story of the 3 days' fight. It makes no difference to him whether the listeners number 10 or 500. He knows his lessons very well, and while he was in Libby Prison during the Gettysburg fight, he's made the battle his life study. Daily he tells men who were there much they never knew. And while frequently taken to task by some smart aleck, he always comes out on top. His narrative is clear, concise, marvelous. In 2 hours, he tells what men have been trying to discover for a score of years. He shows where every struggle took place, where every corps, brigade, division, or regiment, either side, was stationed. He tells who commanded them, what officers were killed and wounded, The past and present condition of the field he knows by heart, and his listeners never fail to appreciate and marvel at the man's vast fund. There is but one Holdsworth and one Gettysburg. Without the former, the latter would be nothing, so far as battlefields are concerned. So, pretty high accolade for him. The other thing I know that tells me that these two guys really got together well is John Batchelder has encouraged William Holdsworth to go on the lecture circuit. We have a lot of accounts in the 1880s of the renowned battlefield guide Holdsworth speaking in Boston or in Philadelphia or in Cleveland. So they're out there picking it up. Very famous picture of Holdsworth tour with President Grover Cleveland. This is May of 1884. We know Batchelder and Holdsworth both did this tour. Holdsworth basically gave the tour. President Cleveland, Vice President Thomas Hendricks, Governor Robert Patterson of PA, and General Henry Hunt, the artilleryman, the one you can't see in here because he's sitting back behind Holdsworth. The driver of the president's carriage was Holdsworth, whose knowledge of details of the event of the 3 days fight is said to be remarkable. But when they got to Little Round Top, Batchelder joined them. Colonel Batchelder gave the president the most succinct explanation of the events which occurred on the plain below and pointed out with eloquent accuracy the movements and counter-movements of the troops, both of them involved. This is a picture of John Batchelder with a group pre-1888 because Warren's not standing on his rock, but a lot of other people are. Something you can't really do today. But it was in 1886, about this time, that Batchelder finishes his project for the government, turns it in. Turns it into 2,550 pages, 4 volumes, 58 maps. That's what he did. Now here's the telling thing about the fact that he isn't writing a history for the government. A week after he delivered it, he wrote in the newspaper, Springfield Republican newspaper, Colonel Batchelder stated he has just completed the great work of surveying, mapping, and collecting records of the battle for the government, and now is about to proceed with the preparation of his popular history of the battle. Okay, so we have a count that he was going to do that. Holdsworth, Batchelder, those are my two big ones. They keep guiding up through the battle anniversary, 1888. Both of them slowed. William Holdsworth, at a relatively young age, suffers a stroke in 1886. He'll suffer another stroke that fall. He will be, to all intents and purposes, incapacitated most of the rest of his life. We do have accounts of him giving tours after this, but not too many. We know that he has replacements coming up. Okay. Here's an ad. But down at the bottom there was a name that intrigued me. James T. Long, his manager. James T. Long is being brought in by Holdsworth as a replacement, even before Holdsworth stops guiding. And this is he. Not the guide and hackman, the guide and delineator. Guide and delineator. He is not a native of Gettysburg. He was born and raised in Lancaster County. Private, 99th Pennsylvania, I believe it was, till he became disabled. Had typhoid fever. I think he had a tree fall on him too. Neither of those were very good for his health. He went back home, discharged, and he tried to join the Army several more times, but was not permitted until the great crisis precipitating or beginning the Battle of Gettysburg, the Gettysburg campaign, raising regiments. And he will rejoin the 21st Pennsylvania Cavalry and will serve the rest of the war as a cavalryman. After the war is over, he is brevetted a captain and he becomes the agent for the Gettysburg and Harrisburg Railroad. Hence, his knowledge is tied to the battlefield. And my personal thought is he kind of liked the town and he liked the dashing life of a battlefield guide, so he retired from the railroad and stayed here. He's already appearing, J.T. Long, by a renowned battlefield guide. This is in 1886. This is only a couple of years after the railroad came. And he's giving illustrated lectures using a thing called the stereopticon. I had to find out what it was. Okay? Early PowerPoint is what I figured out after all the thing it was. Early PowerPoint. Okay? It turns out that Holdsworth used this, Batchelder used this, Long used this. They were using it clear up into the 20th century. And they all had well over 200 slides to show on this particular thing. He is also active on the lecture circuit, mainly to J.R. Holmes right now, so he's following that. And of course, he will start the trend that guides always have if you got to write a book. He writes 2. Gettysburg, How the Battle Was Fought, and later publishes the 16th Decisive Battle of the World. Both of these are his. By the 25th anniversary, the efforts of Batchelder, Holdsworth, Long, hotel owners, Hackman, there's a thriving industry here at Gettysburg. There's an infrastructure to meet them. There's livery stables. There's a memorial battlefield. There are roads. Visitors are coming here in larger and larger numbers, including veterans themselves. I'm going to show you some of the other guides at that time that I've been able to identify. And there is no list. This is one of the veterans coming. There is no list of other who they are. You have to kind of like pick out of their obituaries and things like that. By 1888, 25th anniversary, they were concerned enough about what was going on to complain that there could be other guides coming that summer that just aren't as good as you might think they are. How did I do with my picture? Oh, here. Yeah, we'll come back to it. This is the 1888 July reunion. James Longstreet, the first time he has come back to Gettysburg. In case you don't recognize him, he's often mistaken for Batchelder. They both love those big whiskers. And many of the luminaries of the Union Confederate armies met. That is, the great hero Chamberlain, of course, head and tall over everybody else, Henry Slocum, Longstreet, Butterfield slinking in the rear, Sickles, and Carr, Joseph Carr. But way back here, and this is why I look at these pictures. I like to see people I know, and I knew him. That's Captain James T. Long, the new battlefield guide. Okay? Lurking in the rear, learning, figuring out what's going on. Another veteran of the battle who was here at the time, I'm going to show you this. Somebody sent me this when I was talking about it. I said, well, here's a good picture of Batchelder. This guy right down here. That's not John Batchelder. Anybody know who it is? I just showed you. That's Longstreet. This is Henry Slocum. This is Henry Slocum's fancy hat. Okay? And I do have an account that Slocum said, Longstreet, why don't you come along with me? I got to go do some monument dedications. He brought him along. He looks pretty bored by this time, but I find it interesting. 13th New Jersey. Here's James Longstreet wishing he was somewhere else. But it is not Batchelder. Everybody's going after the big white whiskers at the time. Another guy who was definitely present in 1880, definitely a guide at Gettysburg, is this fellow right here, Charles Hale, veteran of the 5th New Hampshire Infantry, enlisted as a corporal when the war began. He is wounded at Fredericksburg. He is wounded again at Chancellorsville slightly and is a lieutenant. He is on Edward Cross's brigade staff here at Gettysburg. And it is from Charles Hale that we get the story that they tell about Edward Cross. Colonel, this will be the last battle you'll fight without a star. Too late, General. This is my last battle. Well, that came from him. He is the fellow who supposedly tied the black bandana around Edward Cross's head that day rather than the red one. So those stories are coming from him directly. He leaves the Army in August of 1864, goes back home to New Hampshire, returns, marries, takes up a career, and he pops up on our scene again in the 1880s when he has moved his family to New Jersey and has become a lecturer at the cyclorama that was being displayed in New Jersey at the time. When his cyclorama is being transported from New Jersey to Ohio, these things did move. And this one was not our cyclorama. This was one of the, I forget what Sue Boardman called them, Buckeyes or whatever. He is here in Gettysburg. And in July of 1887, he is recorded as having attended one of the big reunions here. And within just a couple of months, his hometown newspaper reported that he is now located at Gettysburg to be a guide for visitors on the battlefield. There he is down there in the corner. Another picture of him. And yet again, these three pictures are dated 3 years apart. So I know for at least 3 years, 1888, 1889, 1890, Charles Hale was here. I suspect he left after 1890. I have no other record of him in any newspaper account of being here on the battlefield at all. I suspect he may have followed his cyclorama finally around. He ends up out in Milwaukee in 1899, just 9 years after this picture's taken. He dies at a very young age of 59, so he's not here long. Group photographs like this are really important because I see these guys working out there, and of course you guys are all familiar with William Tipton, who, note down at the bottom of his business card, and these all came from Sue Boardman, she gave me a lot of these cards, only reliable guys stop at Devil's Den. Only reliable ones. And I thought that was interesting. The wildly romantic Devil's Den. Never heard that before. William Tipton was never a guide. Never a guide. But he worked with them very closely. Allie Holdsworth wrote this, said Tipton, Mumper, Williams were all in the photography business, and their races were something to see. They all took pictures in the field, and all would race back to town and then race back again with the proofs to be the first one to rejoin the tourist and sell them their picture. Now, even though William Tipton never guided, his son, William Jr., was an early guide. He did guide on the field. He was a 1915 licensed guide, and he guided up until 1919. So there are Tiptons who worked as battlefield guides, but not as photographers. Another group of royalty coming to the battlefield, this is the Comte de Paris, who came here in 1890. And he was able to acquire a large collection of officers. I've always been interested in the fact of what Newton and Doubleday were saying to each other, given their actions here at Gettysburg on July the 1st and all. But this particular group left a tremendous account on the battlefield. This was the only time the Comte de Paris came back to the United States. He was here, of course, in 1862 with the armies. He and his brother, I believe it was, serving as official aides to George McClellan. He went back to Europe and spent most of the rest of his life trying to reclaim a claim to the throne of France, which was not well received in France. But he came back here in 1890. He was doing a research for a book on, I believe it was kind of early American industrialism. But he wanted to see the sites of his old battlefields. And he stayed down in the Richmond area where he had had his army experience. And he said in his search for battlefield memorabilia, he has encountered lapsing memories, wretched roads, irresponsible guides, and unreliable maps. Until he got to Gettysburg. And he ran into a fairly interesting place. And Captain Long was his guide. Captain James T. Long, deep-chested, full-tongued, and untiring, acted as guide and demonstrator of the war scenes, receiving the thanks of the Count and party for the very complete and eloquent manner in which he rehearsed and described the scenes which he had participated and knows by heart. I thought that their account of the buggies going along was inspiring. They said it resembled a first-class country funeral. All these buggies going along the way. So this type of thing is taking place 1890s as we're going along. Joining Long, a fourth guide. There's four real big people in the 19th century, I believe, brought guiding about. Batchelder's one, Holdsworth is another. James Long is the third, and this guy, Captain Minnick. When I was a boy, I remember getting little souvenir guides of Gettysburg. Minnick's tour book, Long's tour book. Those were my first books that I really read about them. Minnick is not a captain. Captain, major, rank seems to be an early guide thing. You had to have it. Luther Minnick spent the Battle of Gettysburg in his home on Middle Street in Gettysburg in the cellar. He's just a boy, just a young man at that time. He never served in the Civil War, never had a rank and all that. He actually had an idea that perhaps he'd like to become a minister. So he went to the preparatory department at the college for 2 years, 1865-66, decided that was not for him. He became a confectioner. A confectioner. He is a confectioner for 25 years down in Emmitsburg, Maryland, a confectioner. Sounds good. I'm assuming that they were bakers of some type using sugar, not just candy makers. 1880, he marries the sister of Rebecca Ziegler, Billy Ziegler's wife, Holdsworth's partner. See the ties? They're coming in here. He marries her. And up until 1886, he's purely a confectioner. And here, one of the dedications, 155th Pennsylvania, it said, after the exercise, the whole party went to Mr. Minnick's pavilion, where all enjoyed the abundant supply of good things there provided. But sometime around that period, Sergeant Holdsworth suffered his stroke. That creates an economic problem for the livery stable. Your main guy is out. We need somebody else. I really think William Ziegler and Holdsworth grabbed a hold of confectioner brother-in-law Minnick and said, how'd you like to be a guide? I think that's it. And within 2 years, there he is up there guiding on Devil's Den. He has published his own tour book, Gettysburg, What to See, and How to Understand It. It is, they said at the time, going to be one of our most popular tour books, and of course it is still, you can find it around town today. It's still being reprinted, that particular version of it. We do find that Minnick is somewhat learning as he's going through here. I have this account in 1892. Mentions a visit where Colonel Batchelder was involved. Every time he visits Gettysburg, the old colonel obtains a new bit of information which requires overhauling and revising his previous reports. In passing over the field the other day with Minnick, the oratorical guide, he's an oratorical guide, the colonel felt called upon several times to correct statements which have long been historical through constant repetition. So that would have been a real hard tour to take when you got John Batchelder, the guy that knows all the information behind you, listening as you're going along. So you have Long, you have Minnick. Both of these guys are basically taking over. You now have Hotel Gettysburg become involved, the best $2 house in America. That's his headquarters, Long's. Bar stocked with choicest brands only. No better way to take a battlefield tour than to hit the bar first, apparently. Now we know that the last time that any large group of officers seemed to have come here was April of 1893, and Long is involved with this. John Russell Young, the fellow right there, the short guy with the tall hat on, he's a newspaperman. He decided he was going to bring back a lot of the high-ranking leaders from the Battle of Gettysburg and spend 2 days refighting the battle. And he does get a fairly substantial amount. It's the first time E.P. Alexander made it back to Gettysburg, the artilleryman that we know of. It's the first time Billy Mahone made it back, although he didn't do anything during the battle, so I'm not sure he had much to add to the whole thing. And Sickles and Longstreet, again, were on the field. Probably the last time the two men together were here in the battlefield of Gettysburg. And in this, Captain Long is the guide. He is referred to many times. I've not been able to pick him out in the group, although a couple of my colleagues I pointed to say that certainly is an impatient-looking guide stance. Like, let's get this picture over with so we can get on to the main deal. But I don't have a high enough quality picture to actually pick him out. Not only is this the last time that I think any substantial number of officers will show up on the battlefield. This is 1893. It's the last time Batchelder and Holdsworth are around. High water memorial, I think, went up 1892. John Batchelder is probably his last big accomplishment here at Gettysburg. He's still planning for that great volume. Said in 1871, there's an account that his forthcoming history will be the standard work on the subject. 1886, when he finished turning that stuff over to the government. He's about to proceed with the preparation of his popular history. 1892, when they were accounting the dedication of this, he said, the old gentleman means to write one of these days a history of the battle, but he's suffering now from an excess of information and is so burdened with caution, I'm afraid the book will never be written. He dies in 1894, and his obituary, it says, his life's work, for which he has ever since been collecting the facts and writing out the history of this conflict, it fills thousands of pages and is unfinished. So no way he got it done. Typical historian's dilemma, when do you stop researching and start writing? And he ran into it. He did get appointed to the National Park Commission. His one great goal, or his one great dream was to mark the Confederate battle lines. That will be done later. but he passes away in September of 1825. His tombstone, the historian of the Battle of Gettysburg. A good epitaph for him. William Holdsworth was already gone. He passed away August of 1891. Whatever that stroke was he had in 1886, never fully recuperated from it. 1887, he was appointed superintendent of the Soldiers National Cemetery, and the only way you got that job is you had to be a disabled veteran. And he will serve till the end of his life, 1891, superintendent of the cemetery, and he's buried up in Evergreen Cemetery today. So those two are gone. With the passage of those two, a whole new breed of guides will come into existence. Holdsworth's three sons become rival livery owners. C.W. and J. Harry Holdsworth, his two oldest sons, will take over father's livery stable. They will actually buy William Ziegler out, and it will become Holdsworth and Holdsworth. The youngest son, Allie Holdsworth, I showed you a picture of him earlier, he went into business with one of the old liverymen named Hoffman, and their stable served Hotel Gettysburg, Eagle Hotel, Hotel Gettysburg. You notice again, this is a dedication of the Pennsylvania Reserves marker out on Buford Avenue, and you see all the liveries in the back, waiting for them to go. Still going with that. I'll bring back Allie Holdsworth again because he said, I went into the livery business in 1898, and I stayed in it until 1915 when the automobile ran us out of it. Then I put my men in cars, and I think we were the first to give battlefield trips by auto. So he is one of the ones who's going to make that big transformation that was necessary to keep guiding going at the time. I don't have a picture of this fellow. I tried looking for one, could not find it anywhere. Marion Francis Williams, Frank Williams. He was a drummer in the 16th New York Infantry from 1861 until August of 1862 when he was given a disability discharge, wounded 3 times on the peninsula, and given an honorable discharge, and he ended up in Gettysburg. Okay, he didn't go back to New York, came back to Gettysburg, came back to the big city. Notice he was here during the battle because he'd been a guide since '63. Maybe he was the guy on that horse out there in that picture. He hauled wounded over the field immediately after the battle until fall. He will guide until 1923. He is one of the 1915 guides. His son, Meatter Williams, is licensed in 1916 and will continue his father's heritage until 1949. Old guide lore, we have a lot of old guide lore, always said that this fellow, Colonel Sheed said in 1865 that this fellow was a guide. John Chase, wounded 48 times in the Battle of Gettysburg. And I always thought it was kind of unlikely because I never heard of John Chase being here in the town. He was a lecturer at a cyclorama, like Charles Hale had been. And I think that cyclorama was up in Brooklyn, so that's not close to Gettysburg to guide. But then I found an interesting thing, June of 1894 newspaper, 1894. Cannoneer J.F. Chase, who was in the famous fight on Cemetery Hill, has been in Gettysburg some weeks, engaged in making arrangements for constructing a cyclorama on the battlefield. It will be open during the summer near the cemetery on Baltimore Street. 1 week later, they said the cyclorama was up and running. So here he is in a business operation. A few weeks later, they actually reported that Chase and a local partner had purchased the painting, tent, and all of its equipment, and were planning on keeping it in town till after the encampment. And in August 28th, I have an account that said it has left for Williams Grove. So from May until August of 1894, I can place John Chase in Gettysburg. He is wearing a Gettysburg GAR hat. It is likely that he could well have taken tours around the battlefield. So I will no longer discount the story of John Chase. My favorite died. If I could just grow a beard like that. Isn't that magnificent? John Pitzer. John Pitzer, hotel owner in Gettysburg. So not only liveryman, this is a hotel owner. He was born, by his own count, a half a mile west of the Peach Orchard, son of Samuel Pitzer. So born on the battlefield, served 9 months, 165th Pennsylvania Infantry. And when the war it was over, came back, and he tried working his father's farm for a while, but decides that just wasn't exciting enough, so he purchased a little hotel called the Pitzer House. This is the Pitzer House. Then and now. 143 Chambersburg Street. Still a beautiful little old house down there. It looks unchanged since he had it. He had his own livery stable. In the back of the house, there was a livery stable at the time, and acknowledged to act as a guide. And over time, he began doing his own guided tours. He ran the only temperance hotel. Okay, no well-stocked bar in the Pitzer House. And for $1, $1.25 a day, he will give you a team and a guide. Well, that's cheaper than Holtzworth was doing it at $3 a day. So he's undercutting the competitions out there. Like all guides at that time, you got to have a tour book. John Pitzer wrote his own, The 3 Days at Gettysburg. And I thought this was a great one. I've always used this one here. Look at this. He'll make a drive of 15 to 21 miles, $1.25, and he'll include a first-class dinner. No guide today does that. No first-class dinners in ours at all. This starts to really change guiding, though, because of the other people that are coming up. You've got this Gettysburg Railroad, or Gettysburg trolley coming in. People have talked about this before. These cars ran every half hour. Took you out to Round Top Park. Price was 25 cents. Okay, this is what starts to bring people here to Gettysburg who cannot go out and pay $3 for a guide. But I can pay 25 cents and get out on the battlefield. $3 versus 25 cents. So it's putting a lot more people out on the field, and guides have to kind of react to that. But interestingly enough, the trolley starts bringing in their own people. And at least those 5 all worked on the trolley and all became battlefield guides. So it wasn't 25 cents just to sit your butt in a chair and ride out in the battlefield. These people were giving you narration or give you information as you're going out on the field from point A to point B. And every half hour, these things are going to run up to the latter part of the century. So, New Eagle Hotel. Eagle Hotel burned in 1894. William Ziegler sold his interest in the livery stable, and he purchased the site where the Eagle Hotel had been and built the new Eagle, this one. This is the one that stood until 1960 when we needed to replace it with a 7-Eleven. Okay? You need a 7-Eleven better than an old historic landmark. I like this picture. It shows the trolley line. It's conveniently located for the trolley line. It shows an old livery stable, And you look right in front of it, what's that? The first horseless carriages are starting to show up in Gettysburg. 1895, when the park took over, I think there were probably a good 100 people in town guiding. I have no way to prove it. I just think, looking at the names, there have to be that many. The park history says that they believe there was no more than about a dozen people guiding at that time. The reason I think that is this is 1895. These are the very first regulations put out for the park. Regulation number 1. Read that. Authorized guides. Who authorizes them? These are park regulations. This is put out by the Gettysburg Park Commission. What they're saying here in 1895 is, if you're going to come on park grounds, we will have to authorize you to come on park grounds. It's not quite a license, but we're going to authorize you. Then, once we authorize you, you must supply yourself with your own badge. Okay, that's nice. Nice. But this is 20 years before we officially recognize we've been founded. And this is a document. One of these guys is going to be this little fella right here. Charles Gilbert, drummer boy of Company K. He is definitely an early guide. We know he was a carriage maker by trade. There's his tie into the livery system. We know that he's out there on the battlefield, and we know that by 1910, in the census, he lists his profession as battlefield guide. 1900, he's still calling himself a carriage maker. He has 6 sons total. And 4 of those 6 sons will become battlefield guides. 4 of those 6 sons, including this one right here. We're well past the war now. ranks no longer apply. You're no longer major, you're now professor. Okay? And when I became a guide, we still had two people known by the name Professor, Prof. Fiddler, Prof. Wolf. So that kind of replaced the majors and the sergeants of the earlier days. And Gilbert here, I have a picture of him without his hat, does guide up until 1953. 1953. His brother, Benton, guides till 1959. So well up into the modern area. Now Luther Minnick continues a prominent role, 1890s up into the new century. He is doing exactly what his Holdsworth used to do. He's taking groups around the field, he's lecturing around the country, he's picked up the whole thing. He's using the stereopticon. He is a perfect illustration of the dangers of horse and buggy guiding. There's actually a report in 1903 that he was kicked by a horse and thrown 5 feet. It's not supposed that he was injured beyond a severe shaking up and a few contusions. He appeared on the streets as usual after the accident, but he complained of pain in the body. It was subsequently discovered that a rib was broken, and he's now confined to bed. We don't have cars kick us today. It hasn't happened much. Unfortunately, he dies at a young age. That was in 1903. This is 1905. He dies from a stroke. He doesn't have any children, so there are no Minnicks no Minnicks to carry on that particular line. Batchelder only had one daughter, I believe, and she died, I think, in the 1880s, so no Batchelders continued on after that, but we did have others. And then we have this rascal. This is a rascal we can kind of give the credit for completely changing and transforming what Gettysburg did, because it gave Mom, Dad, and the kids easy access to the battlefield. Now they could get where they wanted to go without worrying about excursions, without worrying about getting a livery team. None of that stuff is necessary. 1900, I think there were only 8,000 cars in the entire country, and it said, a statistic I read said only 10 miles of paved roads. They completely overtook the country by 1915 when guiding becomes, and it becomes a pretty big issue. Non-livery guides start to appear in large numbers. Livery guides have to survive. You got to change. You got to give up the horse and buggy. You got to go out and you got to greet this. And the Gilberts that I just pointed out were one of the very first groups of people that took that up. Warren Gilbert mentioned in 1909 taking a group of machines around the battlefield. In 1914, there was an article that 50 Stanley steamers were coming around the battlefield that day. 50 Stanley steamers on there. And this picture, this postcard I have of the Hotel Gettysburg, you can see it. Look at all the cars. How many buggies you see? One. 1915 is going to completely kill that. Well, let me show you a couple other guys. Early guides. For some reason, Buford's statue became the new Devil's Den in the turn of the century. A lot of guide pictures near Buford's statue. And the fellow down here on the ground is a guy named George Sheeler. George Sheeler. He started guiding in 1885. He was a hackman. He will take the guide exam in 1915. His application at that time, 1915, said he'd been guiding for over 35 years. And I think, well, this one's not as good a picture. Let's take a look at this one. This is the badge he's providing himself. Remember that regulation you have to provide yourself with a badge? I'm pretty sure that that's the one that they're providing themselves. Right there. And I have another guide that shows that. He's going to continue guiding until his death in 1920. He's the one on the left here in a guide uniform at that era. His brother Daniel will guide. His nephew will guide. 3 of his sons will become guides, and his grandson will serve as guide. So the Sheelers were a very prominent family. The last one, George Sheeler, dying in 2001. William, his son here on the right, recalled that how he got started in guiding was in 1895. He was 16 years old. He said an old veteran coming by on the street stopped him and asked him if he knew anything about the battlefield. And he offered him $1 a stop to take him around the field. In 1895, someone offers you $1 a stop, you know everything there is to know. Come on. I just often wonder how many stops he actually made that day going around. Another picture at the Buford Monument. Now this is an illegal picture. Notice where the guide is sitting. Okay? Guides are not allowed to sit on cannon today. This is Tommy Myers, Benjamin Franklin Myers. He was also a veteran of the Civil War, private, 2 years, worked with railroads most of his life, Gettysburg and Harrisburg Railroad, for exactly. And he retired in 1901, devoted himself to guiding, took the guide test, became one of the first guides. Only guide ever killed on duty. Tommy Myers. Mr. Myers was guiding a party from Rochester, New York over the battlefield on the evening of August 16th. At the intersection of Emmitsburg Road and a Battlefield Avenue at Peach Orchard, the automobile in which Mr. Myers was riding was struck. The guide was the most seriously injured with a fractured pelvis. Mr. Myers failed to improve, his advanced age hindering his recovery. He remained conscious until the end. Another car. Struck by another car in an accident. So the only guide actually ever killed on active duty. Tommy Myers. I put him up there. This is a guy named Galbraith. Notice the ribbon? I think that's the badge that we were talking about. Charles Sheeds, another young teenager at the time of the Battle of Gettysburg, cousin of Myers. He worked for the railroad also, went into retirement, started working for a livery, became a guide. And here's a good example of the transition, because here he is in 1920, guiding. So he's one of these hackmen who took up the new car fairly quick. In fact, he got a little too fond of it. He was suspended at least 3 times for speeding on battlefield avenues. Okay. Never had to worry about that, I don't think, with a horse and buggy. So our Dean of Battlefield Guides now, Captain Long, still active in the first day of the 20th century. Minnick's gone, Batchelder's gone, Holdsworth is gone, but Long is here. Continuing his illustrated tours, continues to work for the railroads, bringing excursions. This is one in 1910, round trip $2. It's actually in this advertisement that he would be delivering a lecture at the Angle. So he's still doing all of that. He has many groups coming in at that particular time, and in the late 1890s, he purchases a hotel called the Central Hotel, which was somewhere around the courthouse. I do not know if this was the Central Hotel. He was a superb battlefield guide. He was a terrible carpenter. Okay? Terrible carpenter. One of the last accounts of a Captain Long battlefield tour, 1909, he took the Attorney General of the United States, Postmaster of the United States, Secretary of the Navy on a tour. All of these men came up in what was called the Attorney General's private touring car. They arrived from Washington in a stunning 4 hours and a half over roads. And Long would be the guide taking them around. Now, I thought, well, this is interesting. This is a Civil War veteran who really took this new thing. Look at this sign behind him. Okay? See the sign up by his head? Okay, look at the sign. He still delivers delicious Catalysine Springs water. He's faithful to that. This is the headquarters of Captain Long, special tourist guide. But look over here. This is the office of the Gettysburg Automobile Passenger Transport Company agent, Captain J.T. Long. Okay? This guy's thinking. He's the agent of the company. But he is, of course, the last of the big four. And he doesn't last long. He does not survive to the battle anniversary. He dies in August of 1911 at the age of 68. So you have the rise of the auto coming onto the battlefield. You've got the decline of the livery system. It's fallen apart. And remember, Gettysburg before the war was known for carriage making. If you don't have liveries in town, you don't need what? Carriage making and livery stables around 1915 start declining tremendously. The automobile just destroys them both. And you have, because of this, fewer excursion trains. I can come in on my own. I don't need to take the train to do it. So you're going to have fewer of those. And all this leads to more kind of a Wild West type of guiding. And for the first time, 1912, the commissioners of the park noted in their annual report about problems with guides. Anybody could flag down a car. Hackmen were licensed. To drive a hack in Gettysburg for nearly 30 years, you paid a $10 annual fee. That put a little bit of restrictions on you. But anybody could stand out on the curb and flag down a car coming by. That's a big change taking place. You now have conflicts between guides over visiting parties. Two guides going after the same car doesn't work. Creates problems. One of the big complaints the park said was short tripping. They said there's 28 miles of roads. Most guides only use 14 miles of them. They wanted you to use all 28. Overcharging. There was one instance, only one, the park said, that I could find, of a guide charging $7.50 for a tour. Outrageous for that. Untidy appearance and high-pressure soliciting. Listen to this. 1897. The first part of the week, a party of 16 ladies arrived on the 1027 train. They were surrounded by hackmen and detained for 30 minutes and could not force their way out of the mob. They wanted to know if they had to put up with such conduct. One of the ladies later remarked if they ever came back to this place again, they would bring their gentleman friends along and their guns. Okay? I implied by that it was the ladies' guns that they were bringing. So there's all kind of problems with this. One guy, and this is actually reported in the Gettysburg newspaper, 1905. The Gettysburg Guide is the most grasping and independent on the planet. If a visitor escapes with his watch, chain, and his clothing, he's lucky. So there's no doubt by 1913, if the 50th anniversary is coming around, you got too many situations like this. There's your poor, beguiled visitor on the left, being harangued by a glib, silver-tongued guide and just doesn't understand any of it. So the Park Service, the Park Commission needs to step in and do something. They are already controlling guides. I already mentioned that in 1895. When look at this. This is 1913. 1913. 2 years before. This is about the horse's hoofs. Guides are publicly cautioned and instructed the story's incorrect. They should cease telling it. 1913. Cease telling it. Okay? Yeah, they're regulating guides by that time. They're trying to as best they can for it. So 50th anniversary of the battle, we have concerns grow up. John Nicholson is getting concerns. Obviously, many complaints come to commission from tourists at the absence of control of the guides of the battlefield. The commission feels the time has come when the guides should be licensed through the War Department after an examination. That's the key to 1915. They've been giving out licenses. You come up to the Park Commission, they authorize you to go out and work on the field, you put your ribbon on, out you go. But licensed after an examination. The other thing comes out of the 1913 reunion, besides Smiling Dan Sickles here, is a guy named Henry Walker, Pittsburgh. He sent a letter of complaint to the park right after. When a visitor arrives in Gettysburg, he's surrounded by guides soliciting patronage. Some of these are good, but most are poor and illiterate. Some years ago, there was a guy named Captain Long who started out by giving the visitor a brief account of the plan. Then followed each day's fighting step by step, ending with a quite eloquent peroration at the bloody angle. When the visitor left, he had not only a good idea of the battle, but in addition had his patriotism stirred. Now the ordinary guide is illiterate and mixes the battle up. On my last visit with friends, the guide took us to the angle first instead of last, and mixed everything else up in between. Instead of leaving well pleased and impressed, you leave with no clear impression of the event except a lot of people were killed. One of the principal items told us today was statistics on the cost of the monuments instead of what monuments stand for. So Nicholson starts to work. John Nicholson is the chairman of the commission now. He looked up the 1914 regulations for national military parks just to make sure that regulation was still in there. Here they are. I thought it was very strict. You can't even photograph in the park without the permission of the Secretary of War. That would kill us in a day of digital cameras. But I suspect it had something to do with the commercial sale of photographs. But here's that guide regulation again. No persons are permitted to offer their services or act as guides unless licensed for the purpose. The only change in this between 1895 is the badge will now be furnished by the park. Furnished with official badges, evidence of their authority, which remain the property of the United States. So the authority was there. The authority was there. So John Nicholson, he's the guy on the left. The fellow on the right is the Secretary of War, Henry Skillman Breckinridge. 27 years old. 27 years old. This guy had only graduated Harvard Law School 3 years before. He had no military experience. He had no prior public office. Woodrow Wilson liked him and made him Assistant Secretary of War. Unfortunately, the Secretary of War hardly ever worked the first 3 years of the Wilson administration, and he often served as acting Secretary of War. So we have this 27-year-old Assistant Secretary of War, and we've got this old Civil War veteran, John Nicholson, and the two of them together start looking at ways to deal with things. And this is what I call the smoking gun letter. This is the letter Henry Breckinridge sends to Colonel Nicholson saying the prerequisite to a license should be an examination. They tried to push a law into Congress to do this. Congress was not interested in a law. Finally, Breckinridge figured out the fact that he is the Secretary of War, essentially, and they control all battlefields, and therefore can make any rules they want on the land that they choose, and therefore came up with these rules that they could put in. This is Henry Breckinridge. His second most famous thing, besides bringing about testing of guiding. He was a good friend of that fellow in front, who is Charles Lindbergh. He was the intermediary between the Lindbergh family and the kidnapper, and he will serve as one of the counsels at the trial. This is 20 years after the Gettysburg incident. Henry Breckinridge. That's his second claim to fame. What they will develop is this. This is the very first guide exam. 101 questions written by Immer Cope, the park engineer, and William Stork. William Stork was the chief forester of the park at that time, but he had been a professional educator. And Stork and Cope wrote the thing. It's 101 questions, divided into 3 lists. Only the first 51 questions were ever used for the test. I don't know why. And the first 51 questions only took you up to the end of the first day's battle. So you were never tested on the second day, third day, cavalry, anything else. You're only tested on weapons, tactics, how they got here in the first day. I guess they figured after that you knew it. 95 old guides, 95 people in town applied to take the test. 91 passed it. You could pass it in with a score of 40%. You were given a license, a first class, a second class, a third class license based on the score. You had to get a first class license. But they gave you a third class license at 40%, but then you had to take other tests to bring your grade up to passing. Some people weren't qualified, as you can see. William Stork read the question, and you had to write out the answer longhand. This fellow didn't know. Even with multiple choice 2 parts, he didn't know either one. I always like this with the grade, and this is Stork's sense of humor. 21 don't knows, 2 don't knows. 0%. And that was October 17th, 1915, when all tests were given, and they announced that only licensed tested guides were authorized in the field.
Did he get a third-class license?
He did not. He had to have 40%. Yeah. Harry Long was highest score on the test. He is the oldest son of Captain James T. Long. He will guide until 1922. J. Allie Holdsworth, who I've quoted several times, will continue guiding up until 1950s. Beautiful article in the newspaper on his 80th anniversary. 65 years of guide service, 85 years after his father became the first battlefield guide, William Holdsworth. Thank you.